Good afternoon and welcome back to the IMF World Bank Week here at the Atlantic Council. My name is Jan Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Council's Europe Center, coming to you live from the global headquarters of the Council here in Washington, D.C. It is my pleasure to introduce this conversation with the Minister of Economy, Trade and Business of Spain, Carlos Cuerpo. Warm welcome, Minister. Welcome back, I should say, to the Atlantic Council, because the Minister has not only been a regular at these IMF World Bank meetings, but also a regular at the Atlantic Council for our annual series of programming with dozens of the highest level financial policy and decision makers from all over the world who have descended on Washington for the spring meetings. Thank you, Minister, for being so generous with your time, your always excellent analysis and your candor at the Council on an annual basis. This event is also part of the Transatlantic Economic Dialogues, our joint effort here between the GeoEconomics Center and the Europe Center, which seeks to maintain and grow dialogue and debate on the major issues shaping the future of the US-European economic relationship. And we all know these discussions are more critical than ever. As the IMF's World Economic Output laid out earlier this week, tariff measures and the push to revise global trade by the administration in Washington in the United States have changed the landscape and forced governments to reorder their economic priorities. The IMF is also warning of a significant impact on global economic activity and has projected a drop in global growth for the years ahead. But Spain, however, is an exception and is leading the pack, not just in Europe, with an upward revision of 2.5% projected growth. This year, it is the only advanced economy to see its growth forecast upgraded this week. So we'll hopefully be able to explore that. Uncertainty still lies ahead for Europe, however, which counts Spain as the fourth largest economy in the Eurozone and for the transatlantic economic and trade relationship. There's a lot to unpack here, and I'm sure the Minister will get into the details and these stats very shortly. Quickly, by way of background, Minister Cuerpo has served as Spain's Minister for the Economy, Trade and Business since 2023. He held other senior positions inside the ministry, including as the Secretary General of the Spanish Treasury. He has also done tours in Brussels at the European Commission and holds a PhD in economics. Minister Cuerpo, thank you again for joining us. And I'm looking forward to your conversation with Josh Lipsky, the Chair of International Economics and the Senior Director of the Council's GeoEconomics Center, which is expertly organizing this IMF World Bank Week here at the Atlantic Council. Josh, over to you. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Jorn, and thank you to all our colleagues at the Europe Center for your partnership throughout this week and all year at the Atlantic Council. An honor to partner with you. Minister, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction as well and the nice words.
Let's dive in, and I want to start where Jorn left off on Spain's upward revision, a rare bright spot in this WEO, which essentially saw downgrades across the board given the impact of tariffs and trade wars. So how does Spain do it? What's behind the upgrade? But probably more importantly, is that sustainable as you look ahead, given the headwinds and into 2026?
Well, that's actually the key question, to what extent this growth model and these figures are sustainable going forward. And I have to say that for the second year in a row, Spain will be the advanced economy with the biggest GDP growth figure. So I think that is just by itself telling you that this is not a cyclical element, that we're undergoing a structural transformation and modernization of our economy, which is helping us lead the pack within the major advanced economies in the Eurozone as well. Just to give you an idea, in 2024, Spain, which represents around 10% of the euro area size in economic terms, contributed to 50% of euro area growth and around 30% to employment creation in the euro area. So that's by how much we are being, let's say, in the driver's seat in economic growth in the eurozone. And you were asking, so what are the main factors or the drivers of this trend? I'd say that we have a balanced growth model, meaning that we do not experience, as we did in previous episodes, in previous growth episodes, any imbalance that would actually stop our growth going forward. We are having a surplus, external sector surplus, so we are a competitive economy, not only in terms of goods trades, but also in terms of services. Tourism, but also non-tourism services, that's key. We're also taking advantage of the immigration flows, which are contributing positively to our growth model and also to our public finances. We're a hub for investment, for foreign direct investment, thanks also to our bet for renewable energies. So these are just a few elements that are making up this positive story for Spain.
So let's talk about the headwinds that Spain is confronting from outside of Spain. We hear the dominant issue that everyone's talking about are the trade wars. I think Spain, roughly 5% of exports go to the US, so that's relatively insulated. But across the Eurozone, obviously a significant impact. And how do you model this in as you're thinking about Spain's economy in the months ahead?
Well, actually, as you said, the direct exposure of the Spanish economy to this U.S. trade shock is limited, or at least less substantial than other euro area countries. But there is this indirect channel coming through the impact in our main trading partners within the Eurozone. And also, aside from the big macro impact, where I think it's too soon to know due to the big uncertainty, not only in terms of the size of the shock, but the extent or the length also of the shock. So we're very much in a case of not forecasting, but scenario building to some extent. So what is our main task at this juncture is to look at the sectors that will be most affected and try to protect them from this shock, try to minimize the impact. That's what we're doing. Actually, just barely 12 hours after the press conference by President Trump, where he was announcing the tariffs for the rest of the world, Spain had already a plan, a safety net for our firms and industries with financial instruments and trade instruments to protect them.
Is this autos, pharmaceutical? I'm thinking within Spain,
Yes.
which industries are most affected here?
Well, those two, although there is no tariff yet on pharma, but
You're anticipating?
there is a high likelihood, I would say, but let's wait. But then also other sectors, for example, within the primary sector, we have specific products like olive oil or wine, which also might be more exposed or affected. Cheese as well. But steel, cars, aluminium, steel are also somehow into play when it comes to the direct exposure.
So I'm going to ask you more about the trade wars and the global effect, but I want to talk about what I would have asked you if we weren't having the trade wars going on right now, which is let's talk about debt to GDP. Spain reduced debt to GDP significantly since the peak in 2020 that the whole world experienced with the COVID shock. But now we have the shocks from trade. We have the promise to expand defense spending. Is it still possible to continue the deficit reduction path?
Well, actually, one of the key elements of our balanced growth model is fiscal responsibility. Actually, that's an essential part, a necessary condition for this growth model to be sustained over time. And as you said, we reached a peak, actually was early 2021 after the response to the pandemic. And since that peak, debt to GDP ratio has come down by more than 22 percentage points. That's how much additional fiscal space we have created, basically going back to pre-COVID levels. So being able to respond to another shock if it comes. So that's out of course, a reduction in our deficit figures as well. We were aiming at 3% deficit to GDP level in 2024, and we actually overachieved it because the end figure was actually 2.8%. So this is also the way that we're planning on going forward, of course, within the new framework of fiscal rules in the EU.
But you see the path continuing and a way to do it.
That's actually one of our main commitments here, is to really keep these sustainable dynamics in the debt path, because that's the way forward also in terms of ensuring that we can keep on growing and that we can keep also reducing debt by the denominator, so by GDP growth. And as we will reach a primary surplus, that is deficit without interest rate payments will be in surplus, that will contribute also to the positive snowball effect in terms of reduction in debt.
And defense spending, the issues the U.S. is calling for here and the commitment across Europe to increase defense spending, impact there?
Well, you know, it's a nice week to ask about that because in Spain, we had a commitment more than 10 years ago to reach this 2% level within NATO. But what we've done, so our president actually said that we would reach that, we would honor that commitment by 2029, but within the current context, he said that we would bring that forward. And that's what we've done. He announced this very Tuesday, this week, that we would actually achieve this 2% level in 2025 already. So Spain is doing its part. We know that we have to step up our defense and security spending or investment. But then there is an additional EU dimension to this story. We have to do our homework in the EU by defining what capabilities are necessary to redefine, again, our security and defense strategy, how to finance that. And that will naturally bring this spending to a percentage point. Whatever that percentage point in terms of GDP is, would be the appropriate one.
Would you be in favor of issuing some kind of joint European debt for defense spending?
I think this is a perfect pilot scenario to justify the essence of what we call joint issuance of debt in the EU. We're actually from Spain proposing the creation of a special purpose vehicle, a fund that can be used to finance this European public good. Because we're talking about an European public good which has positive externalities for everyone. And what we're saying is that this joint financing should give loans, but also transfers, grants to member states that will be needing it the most. We did that during COVID. Actually, Spain benefited from solidarity from other countries because we were hardly affected. And now what we're putting on the table is a proposal that would actually give this solidarity element to those countries that need it the most, meaning, of course, the eastern border countries, which would be those needing more investment and security spending.
One more domestic economy focus, and then we'll broaden out unemployment. We've talked about it every time you're here. The trajectory is good. Unemployment's coming down, but levels are still higher than many European counterparts. What are the solutions on the table?
Well, that's a structural challenge for Spain and other EU partners, but specifically for Spain. So on this, it is important also that we're growing in a balanced way, because every step or every reduction of unemployment will be structural. So this is not a cyclical movement. We're now closer to 10%. And what we want is within this term that will be ending in 2027 of our government to be able to reach full employment level, which for us in Spain would be around 7-8%, which was close to the height previous to the financial crisis, where we were actually living under a housing bubble, but we want to reach that on a sustainable level.
So let's talk China. Promised we'd get to this, and this is really what everyone is talking about this week, US-China trade war. Where does Spain find itself in between US and China? Large exporter to Spain than the US from a Spanish perspective, but US imports more of Spain's goods than China. We've seen the conversations, we've seen the leadership in Beijing even after the announcement of the trade wars. How do you navigate these cross currents right now?
Well, from the Spanish, but also from the European perspective, there is a trend, there is a very fully fledged line of work for the past 2, 3, 4 years of trying to somehow rebalance our deficit with respect to China, to engage with the Chinese authorities. And of course, Spain is part of this work. We had the visit of President Sanchez a few weeks ago, but President von der Leyen will be in China in a couple of months as well. So it's a strategy where what we intend to do is to consider China not only as a competitor or as a rival in many areas, but also as a potential partner. We want to open up the Chinese market to our products and to the extent possible also attract Chinese investments, but always within the umbrella of economic security. Our economic security agenda. We have to protect particularly sensitive sectors, industries, and to make sure that our companies actually perform on a level playing field with respect to foreign companies as well. And then coming back to the US, of course, I said this is a long-term trend that we've been working with, engaging with Chinese authorities. And then now we're in a new setup with respect to the US in terms of trade. And what we want, and we've been very clear since the very beginning from Europe, is to end this conflict, to actually achieve a negotiated solution that will bring this relationship even closer. That's our hand is extended to our US friends and colleagues, and this is what we want. We want to engage in even further integration with the US. Just to give you a figure, sorry, Josh, 4.5 billion is how much trade in goods and services crosses the Atlantic on a daily basis. That's a treasure that we have to protect.
That's well said. But have you seen any signals in your meetings with your colleagues so far that we're anywhere closer to the kind of détente you're describing, which I think is admirable and we'd like to get to?
Well, I've met over the past couple of weeks with Secretary Bessent and with Ambassador Greer as well. And I think the message that the door is open to negotiate an agreement is a genuine message. And that's what I felt from both meetings, and this is actually encouraging for me.
Do you worry about Chinese manufacturing capacity coming to Europe, given the high tariffs in the US? It seems natural. We've had a lot of conversations so far this week. If there's 145% tariffs on a range of Chinese goods, Europe would be the place where a lot of those could end up, not even in the months ahead, but in the weeks ahead.
Well, of course we're worried. We're concerned about that, and there's a continuous monitoring of what's going on in our borders in order to be able to identify whether it actually happens. And we have already taken action in the steel industry, where we have, as you know, a safeguard clause, and we reduced that safeguard clause to avoid this element of trade diversion in steel. So we will be attentive, and if necessary, we will react, of course.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Anyone watching online, feel free to use askac.org. I will get to as many questions as I can in our limited time. But do you think, now let's talk EU more broadly in negotiation on trade. Does the EU have the tools it needs to respond? It was an interesting kind of calibration when the 20% tariffs were announced and the EU announced their response, and then of course the president lowered their reciprocal tariffs to 10. Is that the right response from your perspective? And should the EU be preparing more? Is it quietly telling the administration how they will retaliate, publicly, or both?
Well, this is the moment to negotiate, I would say, as a starting point. So it's not the moment to put the guns on the table on what sort of retaliation we could have. Before this 90-day pause, what we had was the definition of a response, not to the 20% tariff, but to the 25% to steel and aluminium. Steel. So that's where we were, responding to the original tariffs for aluminium and steel. So being very prudent in our approach, trying really not to escalate anything, and showing the US, but also the rest of our counterparts, that what we want is a fair engagement and a fair negotiation. And we have to understand that the final point of agreement has to be a balanced one and a fair one. Because in the meantime, while we negotiate, most of the tariffs are in place. Right. And they're affecting our companies, they're affecting our industries. And this is a message that we should not forget.
So let's talk about IMF-World Bank, the reason we're all here this week. A very interesting and important speech from Secretary Bessent yesterday, talking about how the US sees the institutions. I'm curious for your view. Obviously, the US position is a sort of back to basics, at least when it comes to the fund. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you agree with the critiques that the fund has mission creep, as the US Treasury Secretary called it?
Well, I think that we should maybe discuss what the basics mean in today's world with respect to when the fund was created. So the core mission is not that the core mission has changed, is that basically the risks that the fund is there to protect us from, including of course financial instability or imbalances, are actually have different driving factors. And this is just to come to the point that climate change is a key element that can prove to be decisive in terms of instability, that can prove decisive in terms of economic recession or risks. And you only have to look at particular countries, even vulnerable countries, that really rely on those events not happening to actually be able to grow. So again, I think that's a discussion where I think we should be having around the role of these institutions, because the core mandate, we all understand that somehow, even though still is defined as the same core mandate, the elements that would drive the action that we need from the IMF or the World Bank, that will define them somehow fulfilling their mandate, are different today that in the 40s or then almost 80 years ago.
No, that's a very good point. The global economy changes, and what is macroeconomically
of course we would expect those institutions to target those driving factors, those the main risks that lie ahead. And climate change is the risk going ahead.
But you're very clear in what you just said. The Secretary of Treasury is very clear in how he sees it. How is this going to come to a head in the coming months at the board, across the finance ministers? Because it seems, at least from the speech yesterday, they are serious about wanting these changes.
Well, that's a good question. I don't have a crystal ball. But I would say that somehow we should all help the institutions. We should all help Kristalina, we should all help Ajay in doing their functions the best they can and in using the tools at their disposal the best they can. And that's, I think, somewhere where we can find common ground within all the shareholders, including the US, Europe, and others. Then let's see to what extent we can find a common ground as well.
I think Spain has lived that and walked the walk. I remember last time we met in October, there was the commitment to IDA, it was 400 million euro. I mean, there's significant amount of money being put in.
I mean, we've been very vocal in our bet for not only the multilateral world order, but also for aid, for development and financing for development. And actually, as you know, in June, end of June, early July, we will host the conference, the international conference on finance for development in Sevilla. And this is a great, I think, landmark in terms of what our footprint for development needs to be. And when I say our, it's not just a Spanish one, but I say the multilateral world. What we want is to encourage everyone to show how much they care. And that's pretty much the motto of the Sevilla conference.
Okay, I'm going to turn to online questions in the 5 minutes I have left. There are 7 or 8 questions about the digital euro. I know you'll be very shocked to hear this, Mr. Cuerpo. So we talked about this before. What's the status of the project from your perspective? I think you've been supportive of it, but what do you see happening in terms of the rollout and next steps?
Well, this is one of the projects where I think there is an acceleration now in terms of really getting to the autonomic strategy, the strategic autonomy that comes out of having our own digital currency, for example, in terms of payment systems. So I would say for the past months or quarters, there's been, again, a common understanding that we need to go ahead and that we need to push for this as fast as we can. The ECB is doing an excellent job. And I think there is also, I would say, shared support from all member states, and hopefully this will happen sooner than later.
Timeline, you think?
It's hard to tell, but I hope there will be somehow important developments in 2025, so that we're getting ready in 2026 to establish our digital currency.
So we'll check back in October, where I hope you'll join us again here at the Council. It's an open invitation always. Question here about the WTO. We talked about the IMF. We talked about the World Bank. Spain's view on the WTO. Is there hope for revitalization? Is this now essentially dysfunctional and defunct? And it pains me to say that, but given where we see global trade at this moment, just trying to make a realistic assessment.
Well, actually, we've seen issues related to WTO functioning for the past few years. So this is not a recent element. And we've been discussing how to reform the whole system for the past few years as well. So we have to look through the short-term glass and the short-term somehow trade conflict and understand that there will be a time to discuss the new settlement of a rules-based trade order. Hopefully that will come sooner than later, but that's a pending discussion for sure.
Question here about the flight to the euro that's happening. We had Governor of Banque de France here yesterday, and I know the Bundesbank, GeoEconomics, made comments about this, that while there's obviously been a move in the past few weeks toward the euro, given the volatility here, that might not be a good thing because it speaks to a broader uncertainty about the role of the dollar. I'm wondering how you see it from your perspective.
Well, let me look at it from the positive side. That is that investors or financial markets think that Europe is doing its homework. So basically, Europe being a safe haven or an element of stability within the system is good news for everyone. So being an anchor in a certain times is somehow a positive news for the European Union.
This is the difference between a finance minister and a central bank governor, so I appreciate that take.
No, but it's actually true. I think this strength has to come from actions that are taken from the euro side, not from somehow actions that come from other places, including the US. So we have a very clear agenda on where we want to go in terms of European integration, in terms of reaching out to partners as well, like Mercosur or others. And I think this is the way forward. So Europe has to show itself as being a reliable partner, trustworthy and stable as well in our relations with others, and that will just come naturally. The euro will be, of course, a safe asset or a safe haven for investors.
Okay, I have 2 minutes. I'm going to try to get 2 questions in, one from online, and then I'll do a concluding question. Spain, of course, heavily relies on tourism for its economy. Are you seeing any shifts so far, given what's happening in the world, and what's the diversification strategy long term?
Well, that's an excellent question. So we're not seeing so far any change. Still, 2025 numbers are record numbers, even compared to 2024, which was the best year in history. I think we reached almost 98 million tourists last year. We're a 49 million people country, so it's a huge endeavor, yes. But the thing here, as you said, is how to ensure that this trend is sustainable, how to make sure that this does not create an extra burden, for example, on the use of public services or also on housing. And that's basically the main task at this stage. And when we look at the data, what we've seen over the past few years is an element of deconcentration or diversification, not only geographically, but also in terms of the months or the time concentration during the year. So what we see is that basically what we call shoulder months, so just before and after summer, those that are growing the most. And it's not coast or sun and beach tourism, but it's more rural tourism, agro-tourism, also tourism related to food, to the Spanish gastronomy, which, as you know, is excellent. Business tourism, so there is an element of diversification ensuring sustainability.
You will find no debate on that.
And then just another element. I mean, tourism has been a key driver of growth, but when we look at the export of services, it's non-tourism services that is the lion's share. Actually, we export 100 billion in terms of non-tourism exports, which is more than the 94 billion that we export in services, in tourism services. And these non-tourism services are services to firms, so higher value added, and therefore also part of this modernization story that I talked to you about in the very beginning.
So question here about the EU Recovery and Resilience Plan. Spain, one of the largest recipients, over 160 billion, but the milestone and targets need to be completed by August 26, I believe. Spain's progress from your perspective?
Well, actually, we were the ones leading the creation, or I would say amongst those leading the creation, so that nobody feels sidelined here. But we were very adamant on the need to have these next generation new funds, as we are now in defense, as I just told you. And then we were also leading not only putting into place a specific recovery plan for the use of those funds, but also leading the first steps and the completion of these milestones and targets to get the funds. And now when you look, for example, so we have 2 tranches. You said 160 billion total, 80 billion in transfers and 80 billion in loans. So our strategy was to first go for the grants, so that this could serve to go out of COVID, so to navigate COVID without scars, and then we would use the loans. We are using now the loans to give a continuity to the investment push. So just to give you a figure, for the grants, out of those 80 billion, we've had already called for tenders for more than 78 billion, and around 50 billion have already reached the real economy. So we're trying to be as fast as we can to make the best possible use of those funds, of course.
Okay, final question. You've been here 2 days, a few days left to go in the IMF-World Bank meetings. Concretely, what do you hope to achieve coming out of these meetings that would leave you feel more optimistic than you walked in with?
Well, I think it's a difficult question. Maybe the best deliverable of these meetings would be people talking to each other.
We'll leave it there. We're happy to have you always talk to us.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you, Minister Cuerpo. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Please join me in thanking Minister Cuerpo.